So today I want to talk about politics and libraries. It's becoming apparent that conservatives are starting to target public libraries. Given a lot of the other right-wing attacks on academic thought, it shouldn't be a surprise that areas and topics that revolve around gender, LGBTQ rights, and racial equity are starting to come under fire. And in public libraries, books on these topics are now being targeted and challenged. Now, I need to remind everybody that libraries, whether physical or digital, still represent a place where people can get access to free information. During the course of the pandemic, many more people turned to libraries, some of which had to change their methods to make sure books could still get into the hands of people, and many relied on expanded digital services. Even before that, though, physical libraries had still seen significant use despite the fact that we are in a digital age. As of 2015, 46% of Americans had made use of a library within the previous year, according to Pew Research. According to other Pew Research studies, many still find libraries to be a pillar of their community that are useful places to research or train either for personal or job use. It's a great place for people to learn the basics or even develop their skills in technological usage, which can also be useful for, again, daily life and for job training. And for many, it's represented a source of what information to trust. So what better place to attack than one of the places that people find as a source to trust? According to Pew Research, about 24% of people tend to find the library a place where they can figure out what information is valid and what to trust. And so, given that, I want to take a look at some of these libraries that are coming under conservative attack and look at their stories and highlight them today. And to do that, I want to start off by looking at Niles, Illinois. We have here that right-wingers are taking over library boards to remove books on racism. When Joe Makila decided to run for the board of the Niles Main Public Library in Niles, Illinois, this spring, a community member asked him how he thought the library could better serve the area's increasingly diverse community. Many were stunned by his response. Instead of stocking up on books in seven different languages, if we got people to assimilate and learn English better, I think we would do more good in that area than increasing our inventory of foreign language books. Now, first of all, this is a completely xenophobic statement that is ignoring the idea of what the library is supposed to represent and how it's supposed to serve its community. If you have people coming in who want to be able to take up books in a language that they know, whether that be because they are part of the diverse community that's moving into the area, or whether somebody wants to practice a language, whether it be the language of their parents or not, they should have access to these books. However, this particular standpoint is, of course, about assimilation and bringing people in and basically telling them to get rid of the language that they know and start to learn English. And that is a frustrating thing to hear, especially given that that often represents a form of, again, xenophobia and racism. It quickly became apparent that his goal was to object to the library being a community center. Now, part of the reason I brought up what I did before is that people of color have a tendency to see libraries as a community center far more than any other populations, especially Black and Hispanic populations or Latinx populations, depending on the survey and how it's framed that question. Now, he also opposed spending to repair the building's aging roof and upgrade the facility to better bridge the digital divide, separating low-income residents from their more affluent neighbors. Now, here's the thing. If you have a physical structure, it needs to be repaired. If that roof ends up, causing damage, that could be dangerous for people. And I get the idea of wanting to upgrade the facility to create a better bridge to the digital divide separating low-income residents from their more affluent neighbors. I get that concept. But the idea that you would cut funding to the physical structure of the library is kind of ridiculous, because the digital aspect is providing access to certain information, but it's breaking away some of the community center aspects that these physical buildings and spaces can provide. They can often provide areas where people can get together and study together and work together. And the library is one of the few places in most areas that are still free places that you can gather and create meeting spaces in, even if it is in a limited way because you're not allowed to make a lot of noise. The fact is that seems to be another attack on that regard as well. Makula, who did not respond to any requests for interview, won the election in April and holds a seat on the library board, and two other conservatives were elected alongside him. They've already slashed the budget from 7.4 to 5.9 million, fired staff or reduced their hours, gone from being open 70 hours a week to being open 54 hours a week, and eliminated outreach to schools and nursing homes. There are very few places outside of schools and nursing homes that I can think of off the top of my head that need access to library outreach programs more. And of course, that's where you start targeting, where schools and nursing homes can't get access to books. You start cutting down the hours, you start limiting this, and you're starting to run it like it's a private business. And that's not the point of a library. A library is supposed to be a place where people can gather, where you can get access to free information, and where you can share community events. And this, of course, is being used to specifically target that. And of course, with all of these cutbacks, you're going to see that the money doesn't really get funneled anywhere. It's just about austerity, and austerity for the sake of negative reasons. There's no good reason here. Now, in fact, all of this, these cutbacks are in not the only place that this is happening. Kootenai County, Idaho, Anne Arundel County, Maryland, Lafayette Parish in Louisiana, the town of Frisco, Texas. Local efforts are underway to limit what those libraries can offer as well, especially when it comes to books that are talking about and promoting racial equity and gender inclusivity. Some locales are making opposition to critical race theory, either through books or community lectures and discussions, their core focus, but other locations are adding virulent opposition to comprehensive sex education and LGBTQIA acceptance in a trio of concerns. So they want to leave people without sex education. They want to make sure that LGBTQ plus people are not able to get access to any books that talk about any of their experiences. And they want to destroy any books involving or remove them from the library involving racial equity, histories of racism, and what they have deemed critical race theory, whether that's an accurate representation of critical race theory or not. What's more, while most of the opposition groups purport to be homegrown and grassroots, all have access to support and resources, including model legislation of numerous national right-wing organizations. These include Alliance Defending Freedom, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Family Research Council, Family Watch International, the Heritage Foundation, Project Blitz, as well as other right-wing media outlets including Breitbart, Fox News, Daily Wire, Newsmax, and Washington Free Bacon. So what's basically happening here is that these small areas that are getting these conservatives that seem to want to come into their facilities and become members of the board are literally being astroturfed in by organizations that are supplying huge amounts of money compared to what locals can put up for their regular library elections that really shouldn't have funding behind it. And they are coming into these libraries, dismantling the system, limiting the hours, destroying the communities, and trying to limit the books that are going to be put out there. And given all of that, this is actually going to have an effect. If 24% of people get their information of what's reliable from a library, and you remove a bunch of reliable information about issues around racial equity and LGBTQ rights, and there's stories of people involved in all of these surrounding issues, that's going to make it so that what is considered reliable is mostly pushed towards the right and socially traditional roles. And that's what they really want here. Now again, it needs to be noted that this is far from the first time in history that libraries have come under attack in the USA. During most of its history of the Cold War, libraries came under attack for stocking, quote, communist propaganda. Such librarians were attacked for having The Nation, The New Republic, The New World Review, and The Negro Digest. There was a constant move against the Red Menace and communist sympathizers. And this all comes down into the present day, where a lot of these same attacks that went into the Red Scare and went into the civil rights movement are remanifesting again today. This is a very similar set of arguments that are going on, especially as the country starts to move in a direction, hopefully, of wanting more social democratic policies and hopefully starting to move in a direction of a little bit more racial equity. Even if I think those might not be enough to ultimately fix and come to the positions that I'd like to see the country reach. They basically understand that if young people are introduced to ideas about diversity and inclusion, we are creating an incubator for them to question traditional value. And that is a threat to white supremacists. And that's really what this is about. And if we go to a little bit more information about this case, we find that it's rumored, according to Book Riot, that Makula had spent, and his conservatives that took over this particular board, had spent $15,000 on small local elections, with Makula himself being a Trump donor, and the group being believed to have installed themselves on taxing bodies across the state and county in order to get to gut the public institutions from the inside out. And in the meantime, they had no problems hiring a technology consultant to investigate the library's processes and procedures, paying them $100 an hour with no experience or cap. The person that was put in charge was a wedding videographer with no auditing credentials. So why was this consultant hired and for what reason? And it's just this kind of behavior that makes one question what exactly is going on behind the scenes there. Now, this is, again, not the only area. The board system in general is vulnerable to candidates being able to put enough money to develop voting blocks. If they can create their plans, they can implement things to take over certain areas. And according to Book Riot, one of the things that libraries should be protecting anywhere is that books should be available regardless of class, race, language, age, gender, sexuality, or ability, and that they can enter without paying a fee and utilize a professionally curated selection of resources tailored to that specific community's needs. And that's significantly important. And that ties us right back to the original point that was made when we started looking at the first article, where you're not going to have books in a library that are tailored to the languages of the people in the area that they speak. That's not serving the community and their needs. That's making it an agenda about what you want and what you want to see happen through assimilationist policies. Now, there is a movement in certain areas, in addition, like Farmington County, where a member of the community there had one Mr. Largent who's been unwilling to account for the usage or reallocation of public funds and has demonstrated multiple times that he's unaware of the difference between the financial operations and responsibilities of a library versus a for-profit business. This ends up continuing in an area in Idaho where there's two candidates, Vanessa Robinson and Rachel Ottenson, who tried to get seats in the Community Library Network for Board of Trustees. The challengers have drawn the support of the Kootenai County Republican Central Committee and have advocated for the removal of certain materials from the children's section of the library dealing with social causes, including gender identity, racial discrimination, and sexual orientation. Furthermore, the person involved, Robinson, had stated, "I believe that parents should be confident that their children are exposed to appropriate content while attending the library. It is up to them to select books that broach social issues and causes and not the library network." That's literally the job of a library, to find things that might be available and useful to the communities. And in addition to that, Otteson, the other person, had stated on her website, "I don't think public libraries need to be an extension of scriptural knowledge only, but they sure shouldn't be forcing taxpayer funding on satanic agendas that lead to the destruction of our nation." So they're being quite clear about where this moral outrage is coming from, and it's literally satanic panic, where you're having people come out and say that the violation of quote-unquote traditional values is in some way, shape, or form going to be the satanic agenda, where people who want to be able to find books about them, LGBT books, racial equity based books that actually give the stories of people of color, and books about just anybody else outside of their traditional worldview. Those books should be eliminated because they are, in fact, satanic. And that is a disturbing trend to see gaining power again. To move into another area, we have Lafayette Public Library Board, where the precedents there, they actually removed a grant and if that was supposed to fund part of the library because of discussions about voting rights, where the conservative speaker there was not going to be a conservative speaker at the event, and because of that, they decided to cut the grant and remove it because it had to remain a politically neutral or quote apolitical event. So effectively, what happened is they cut a lot of funding. The precedent effectively positions the library board as the library's thought police. The idea is that, quote, both sides need to be represented in events like this. It makes people wonder what they're supposed to do about topics like the history of slavery in America or fascism. Will these events now require pro-slavery or pro-fascist speakers to pass muster? And that's really what they do want. A lot of the conservatives and right-wingers do want that very much. They would like to have a question of the topics of slavery and fascism and see whether or not those actually have valid parts to them. And fun fact, they don't. There's a reason why we don't want to have that conversation. There's a reason why they are not valid. But the fact of the matter is that places like Fox News have already gone off and started making claims and brought people on to argue that slavery was not in some way tied to racism. And when you get to that point, there's not really an argument to be had against it. In fact, there's nothing to really say. It just becomes a debate for the sake of debate, and nothing is really being said or done. A lot of these positions should be overtly obvious to people that these things are wrong, especially in today's world. But apparently we have to start recycling debates in order to make it so it's quote unquote fair and equitable for conservative values that are pretty much, lost and don't really have value in any way, shape, or form. The library's board stands intent for doing this to rebuild public trust among conservatives, but the effect of its actions is to break trust among people who have and will always continue to support the library. And we have one more instance where a bunch of the members of the board in Ohio decided to remove the Medina County District Library in a vote of 4-3 from the American Library Association because of their stance on BLM and being against racism. This is an organization leaning in one direction, Schultz reported. Lee said about introducing the vote to leave ALA this week. According to a report in the local Medina Gazette, we can't support a partisan organization. It's leaning to the left. We're representing this country. We have to be totally neutral. And that's not really what it's about. And they go on to deny that it's about anything to do with the ALA's support of BLM. But it's really obvious at this point that that is one contributing factor. Now, in all of this, we need to recognize that this seems to be a coordinated attack. While it can't be truly stated, but with all those organizations coming out and backing these different boards across the country and these local organizations, it seems fairly coordinated. It really does seem that many conservatives realize that the only way to indoctrinate people into their values and bring them over to that in a true, fairly fair marketplace of ideas, even in that liberal idea, that they have to remove all the information related to topics of racial equality, gender equality, and LGBTQ plus rights. This is something that we're going to have to watch really closely and try to fight against. And again, when you have 24% of the population seeing libraries as places where they can reliably find good information, and you're removing a ton of that, you're creating a further right narrative. And you're going to put a lot of people at risk in the long run. And a lot of people are not going to be able to find books on their own backgrounds and cultures, ethnicities, and their own stories, especially around LGBTQ plus people. This is not good. And in addition to this, it should be recognized that in all of this, there's also an attack on libraries as an institution where they're starting to be shifted in the direction of being more privatized, where they're being funded like private organizations, moving towards a purely digital understanding of libraries and ignoring the communal space that libraries provide for people. And libraries need to be maintained as free institutions that are continued to allowed to exist, where buildings can be used to be community hubs. And they need to maintain being financially supported properly, not just for the books they provide, but for the communities that they support. This cannot continue, and they cannot continue to be slashed in a private free market manner. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.